Have you ever kept a family secret for decades? I won't ask what, just curious.
I remember that evening in my modest living room in suburban Ohio, where the fading daylight filtered through the half-drawn blinds, casting long shadows across the worn carpet that had seen better days from years of my kids' energetic play and my own hurried footsteps after long shifts at the bank. When my phone suddenly vibrated on the coffee table with a persistent buzz that pulled me away from the half-eaten microwave dinner cooling on my lap, and as I wiped my hands on a napkin before picking it up, expecting perhaps a quick update from Jake about his soccer practice or Lily's latest school project that always seemed to need last-minute supplies, I instead unlocked the screen to find the family group chat exploding with messages that started innocently enough, but quickly turned into a cascade of exclusionary barbs directed squarely at me and my children, beginning with my mother's blunt text that read, "Don't come to the rehearsal dinner, Sarah. You and the kids will just ruin the mood with all that everyday chaos you carry around like an invisible backpack," followed almost immediately by my younger sister Emily's polished reply that echoed the sentiment in a way that pretended to be gentle but landed like a calculated dismissal, stating, "We just want it peaceful for once, without the usual distractions that pull focus from the celebration." And then the chat filled up with responses from our extended relatives, cousins and aunts who chimed in with laughing emojis and quips about how weddings deserve that serene atmosphere unmarred by family extras, their words weaving a narrative that positioned my life as the disruptive force in what should have been a flawless event. Even though just a couple of months earlier I had been the one to step in quietly and cover a significant portion of the venue deposit using my credit card, when Emily confessed over a hurried phone call that her latest entrepreneurial endeavor had left her finances tighter than anticipated. A gesture I made without fanfare because that's what sisters did in our family. Or at least that's what I had always believed until this moment when their casual cruelty made me question every ounce of loyalty I had poured into maintaining those bonds over the years since my divorce left me navigating single parenthood with a determination that often felt more like survival than strength. Sitting there with the phone clutched in my hand, the glow illuminating the lines of fatigue around my eyes from another day of balancing accounts for strangers while my own felt perpetually overdrawn, I felt a surge of that familiar resentment bubbling up from deep within, the kind that had simmered since my ex-husband walked out 5 years ago claiming he needed space, but really just chasing whatever fleeting excitement lay beyond our stable routine. And now here was my own blood treating me like an unwelcome tag-along whose presence would taint their picture-perfect weekend, so without pausing to second-guess the impulse that rose sharp and unyielding, I typed my response into the chat with fingers that moved swiftly across the keyboard, declaring, "Then you won't need my card for the hall if it's meant to be so utterly peaceful without us involved," aiming for a tone that carried both the weight of my contribution and a hint of the leverage it afforded me in this tangled web of familial obligations. And as I hit send, the messages kept coming in a flurry that shifted from surprise to outright mockery, with Emily responding first in a way that dismissed my point as overreaction by saying, "Oh, Sarah, always the dramatic one. It's just one evening. Don't make it into a thing," while Mom added her own layer of deflection with a simple, "Lighten up, dear, it's for the best," accompanied by more of those infuriating emojis that turned my legitimate hurt into something laughable, their collective amusement buzzing through the digital thread like static electricity that made my skin prickle with indignation because they had no idea how stretched thin I truly was, juggling mortgage payments and college savings for Jake and Lily on a salary that rewarded precision more than passion, yet somehow I had always found room to support their whims. From Emily's string of failed ventures that promised glamour but delivered debt to Mom's retirement indulgences in Florida that she justified as well-deserved after raising us, and in that moment of raw vulnerability I decided that passive acceptance was no longer an option, that perhaps a subtle reminder of the strings attached to my generosity might pierce through their self-absorbed bubble without descending into the pettiness they accused me of. So I set the phone down briefly to gather my thoughts while listening to the distant sounds of my kids moving about the house, their innocent chatter a stark contrast to the calculated barbs on my screen. And then I pulled up the contact for the venue manager at the upscale country club where Emily had secured the hall after months of indecision, dialing the number with a steady hand despite the knot in my stomach. Introducing myself as the primary cardholder on the deposit and mentioning in a voice laced with faint concern that there appeared to be some irregularities with the authorization due to recent changes in family commitments. Suggesting politely that they verify the details before locking in any additional charges to avoid potential complications down the line. And the manager responded with professional courtesy, his tone indicating he would investigate promptly without probing too deeply into my vague allusions, which left me with a quiet thrill of anticipation as I ended the call, envisioning the subtle disruption this might cause in their meticulously planned affair, much like a single loose thread unraveling a carefully woven tapestry. But before I could even lean back and savor that small act of reclamation, my phone rang again with an incoming call from the same venue number, the manager's voice on the other end carrying an edge of urgency as he explained that he needed to speak directly with Linda Thompson right away regarding an urgent matter tied to the booking, bypassing me entirely in a way that hinted at discoveries far beyond a simple payment flag, his words trailing off into a promise to follow up once he connected with her. And as I sat there in the gathering dusk of my living room, the weight of unspoken family histories pressing down like an invisible fog, I couldn't shake the foreboding sense that this conversation would unearth something deeper, something that might forever alter the fragile equilibrium we had all pretended to maintain for so long. Waking up the next morning to the aroma of fresh coffee brewing in my kitchen felt like a deceptive calm before the inevitable storm, especially as sunlight streamed through the window highlighting the disarray of breakfast dishes from the hurried morning routine with Jake and Lily, who had dashed off to school without sensing the undercurrent of tension that had kept me tossing through the night. And as I poured my first cup, the steam rising in lazy curls that mirrored the swirling thoughts in my mind about the venue manager's urgent call to Mom the evening before, I couldn't resist checking the family group chat, which had transformed overnight from a flurry of mocking levity into a battlefield of accusations that pinned the blame squarely on my shoulders for what they now described as a catastrophic fraud alert on my credit card that had not only frozen the wedding deposit, but threatened to derail the entire booking at the country club, with Mom's messages leading the charge in a series of frantic texts that demanded to know why I had gone behind their backs to tamper with the payments, when all they wanted was a simple, peaceful evening. Her words laced with that familiar mix of indignation and entitlement that had defined her reactions to any boundary I ever tried to set since becoming the de facto family fixer after Dad's passing 5 years ago, and Emily piled on with equal fervor, her replies escalating to claims that I was sabotaging her happiness out of sheer jealousy over her upcoming marriage to Mark, whose stable job in finance made her life seem like the glossy version of what mine had become after the divorce left me piecing together existence from part-time stability and full-time worry, accusing me outright of being the petty type who couldn't stand seeing others thrive without dragging them down into my own brand of everyday drudgery, and the extended relatives who had laughed along the day before now chimed in with more measured, but still siding comments urging me to apologize and smooth things over for the sake of family harmony, their neutrality feeling like a cop-out that only amplified the isolation I felt scrolling through it all, while the coffee turned bitter on my tongue because they had no clue about the quiet sacrifices I had made. Like that time 2 years back when I authorized a large transfer to Emily's account at Mom's insistence for what was vaguely called an emergency related to her yoga studio expansion that never quite materialized into anything sustainable, or the smaller hits over the years that chipped away at my savings without so much as a thank you, beyond the assumption that my reliability was just part of the package deal of being the older sister and daughter who always came through. Yet instead of diving into a defensive spiral that would only feed their narrative of me as the dramatic troublemaker, I chose to let the silence linger on my end for a strategic pause, finishing my coffee while mentally cataloging ways to respond that carried a sharper edge without tipping into outright war, because humor had always been my shield in these family skirmishes, the kind that poked at their hypocrisies just enough to make them uncomfortable without giving them ammunition to play victim. And that's when inspiration struck as I pulled up my photo gallery on the phone, sifting through archived images from family gatherings that captured Emily in less than flattering lights, like the beach vacation last summer where she was mid-argument with Mark over some trivial packing oversight while I mediated with the kids nearby, or the holiday dinner where her tipsy toast slurred into complaints about her stalled career that contrasted sharply with the poised image she curated for her social media followers, and now for Mark's traditional in-laws who valued decorum above all. So, with a wry internal chuckle at the irony of turning their weapon of the group chat against them, I uploaded a selection of those candid shots to our shared family cloud album under the innocuous label of Fond Memories for the Wedding Scrapbook, knowing full well that the notifications would ping straight to devices in Mark's family circle who had access through Emily's overzealous sharing settings, and sure enough within the hour the private messages started trickling in. First from Emily herself in a tone that flipped from accusatory to pleading as she begged me to remove the uploads before her future mother-in-law saw the unfiltered glimpses of our family's messy dynamics, promising we could hash it out over coffee if I just played nice. But I held my ground with a light-hearted reply that suggested apologies might speed up the process. Feeling that satisfying twinge of witty retribution, as she conceded with a grudging admission that the exclusion text had been harsh though not entirely undeserved in their eyes, though the real undercurrent of unease began to build when I turned back to my banking app. During a lull at work that afternoon, reconciling statements that revealed not just the recent venue charge, but a pattern of older transactions flagged as recurring authorizations I had long forgotten, including one particularly suspicious entry from 18 months prior labeled as a consulting fee, wired to an account in Emily's name that tied back to a brief mention in an old email chain about her involvement in some off-the-books side project with a colleague from her pre-yoga days, whispers of which Mom had always deflected with vague assurances that it was nothing to worry about. And as I connected the dots in the quiet of my cubicle, surrounded by the hum of keyboards and muffled conversations from colleagues navigating their own fiscal tightropes, a nagging suspicion took root that Emily's financial flakiness might conceal something more personal and volatile, perhaps an entanglement from her past that explained the urgency behind keeping certain family members at arm's length. During this wedding phase, a twist that reframed the entire group chat drama from mere snobbery to a deliberate smokescreen. But before I could dwell further on piecing together those elusive clues, my phone vibrated with an incoming call from Mom. Her voice stripped of its usual bluster and laced instead with a rare tremor that hinted at depths she rarely revealed, insisting I meet her at the old diner on the edge of town where we had shared countless heart-to-hearts over greasy fries during my high school days, claiming there was a family secret tied to all this that she could only explain face-to-face away from prying digital eyes, her words trailing off into an invitation that carried the weight of unspoken histories and potential reckonings, leaving me to stare at the screen long after the line went dead, the office clock ticking away the minutes as uncertainty coiled tighter around the question of whether this revelation would vindicate my actions or pull me into a vortex of betrayals I never saw coming. The drive to that familiar roadside diner along the interstate unfolded under a sky heavy with overcast clouds that seemed to mirror the gathering weight in my chest as I replayed Mom's trembling voice from the phone call the day before, her insistence on meeting in person carrying an undercurrent of desperation that I hadn't heard since the raw days following Dad's funeral when she leaned on me more than anyone to hold the fragments together. And as I maneuvered my reliable old sedan past the billboards advertising quick-fix loans and family vacation spots that felt worlds away from our tangled realities, I couldn't help but let my mind wander to the subtle shifts in family dynamics over the years. How Emily's carefree pursuits always seemed to land softly while mine required constant course corrections amid the demands of raising Jake and Lily without the buffer of a partner's income. Yet, despite those imbalances, I had always shown up, wiring funds or offering my home as a crash pad, without expecting fanfare because that's how we Thompsons operated, or so I told myself until the group chat exclusion cracked open the facade revealing layers of resentment I had buried under layers of obligation. And pulling into the gravel lot of the diner with its flickering sign promising bottomless coffee and homemade pies, I spotted Mom already seated in our usual booth by the window, her posture hunched over a menu as if avoiding eye contact with the world outside, and sliding in across. From her I ordered my standard black coffee while she fidgeted with her napkin, the air between us thick with unspoken accusations from the chat frenzy that had painted me as the antagonist in Emily's wedding saga. But instead of launching into defensives, she surprised me by easing into a confession that unraveled slowly like a thread pulled from an old sweater, admitting over her half-eaten club sandwich that the family had indeed tapped into my credit card more times than I realized over the past few years, starting with those emergencies for Emily's yoga studio renovations that never quite panned out and extending to her own indulgences like weekend getaways to clear her head after Dad's lingering illness drained their nest egg. Framing it all as a natural extension of my generosity that had become so ingrained they forgot to draw the lines. Yet she twisted the narrative midway through with a sigh that carried blame my way, suggesting that my own life choices after the divorce had made me overly sensitive to these matters when really it was just family helping family navigate the rough patches that came with aging parents and ambitious siblings. Her words landing like a gentle rebuke that made me stir my coffee harder than necessary, because while the partial truths she doled out explained the venue hiccup and the exclusion's sharper edge, they conveniently glossed over how this reliance had eroded my own financial security without reciprocity, leaving me to absorb the hits while they chased their versions of bliss, and as the waitress refilled our cups with that steamy brew that burned just enough to ground me in the moment, I felt the anger morph into a calculated resolve, because walking away wasn't an option yet. Not when the wedding loomed like a ticking clock that could either mend or shatter what remained of our bonds. So excusing myself briefly to the restroom under the pretense of freshening up, I instead pulled out my phone and fired off a discreet email to the wedding DJ vendor whose details Emily had once shared in a moment of organizational zeal, proposing a few playlist suggestions that wove in subtle nods to our family's adventurous fiscal history, with tracks like that classic about living on borrowed time or the one crooning about ties that bind too tightly for comfort, phrased innocently as thematic enhancements for the reception to capture the essence of sibling journeys without any overt malice, and hanging that witty thread of potential embarrassment felt like a clever counterpunch that satisfied the itch for retribution without descending into the chaos they accused me of bringing. Though deep down I recognized how this escalating involvement skirted the boundaries of what a protective mother should model for her kids, inviting that twinge of self-doubt about whether I was reclaiming power or just perpetuating the cycle of familial one-upmanship that had defined us for decades. But Mom's conversation circled back as I returned to the booth, her eyes darting evasively when I pressed for fuller details on Emily's side hustles that hinted at shadier entanglements beyond failed businesses. Perhaps something personal like an old flame or undisclosed debts that Mark's thorough in-laws might unearth during their pre-wedding vetting. And she deflected with pleas for unity wrapped in nostalgia about simpler times before divorces and financial strains pulled us apart, wrapping up the lunch with a hug that felt more obligatory than heartfelt before we parted ways in the parking lot. The clouds finally breaking into a light drizzle that matched the unsettled churn in my gut as I headed home, replaying her half-reveals that only deepened the mystery of why they truly wanted me sidelined. But the real jolt came later that evening while I was folding laundry in the quiet hum of the dryer with Jake and Lily settled into their homework routines nearby, when my phone buzzed with an anonymous text from a blocked number forwarding a damning screenshot of Emily's recent bank statements showing a series of overdrafts funneled into luxury spa retreats and unexplained withdrawals that contradicted her polished narrative of stability. The message noting it had been dispatched directly to Mark's family email as a cautionary heads-up from a concerned relative, though the sender remained shrouded in shadow, ramping up the uncertainty because this exposure threatened to topple the wedding altar they had built so carefully. And as I stared at the screen, the final twist hit with another ping from the unknown source, a veiled warning to steer clear of the upcoming rehearsal unless I wanted my own overlooked family vulnerabilities dragged into the spotlight, leaving me frozen amid the scattered clothes with a heart pounding against the implications of who in our circle wielded such insider knowledge and what deeper rifts this anonymous intervention might force wide open before the vows could even be exchanged. As the wedding date crept closer with an inexorable pull that turned the calendar pages into markers of mounting dread, I found myself immersed in the relentless rhythm of my bank job, where every transaction processed through my terminal served as a stark reminder of the invisible fiscal threads that bound me to my family's whims. From the routine approvals for mortgages that echoed my own precarious stability to the denied overdrafts that mirrored the patterns I had uncovered in Emily's statements, and during those long afternoons surrounded by the murmur of colleagues sharing weekend plans for tailgates or family barbecues that felt like distant luxuries in my world of carpools and cost-cutting, I wrestled with the anonymous text's warning that lingered like a shadow over every decision, urging me to stay away from the rehearsal while threatening to expose my own buried vulnerabilities, which I could only guess at as remnants from Dad's estate or perhaps overlooked loans I had extended without documentation. Yet the growing conflict refused to let me retreat into silence, because Emily's direct confrontation came that very evening as I prepared dinner in the kitchen, with the sizzle of ground beef filling the air alongside the scent of onions caramelizing in a pan that had seen countless family meals thrown together on a budget, her call interrupting the domestic normalcy with a voice edged in fury and underlying panic after Mark's mother had pulled her aside for a tense discussion prompted by the leaked bank screenshots, accusing me point-blank of orchestrating the leak out of spite, even as I protested my innocence over the phone, with the kids hovering curiously nearby, drawn by the rising volume. And in that heated exchange, she revealed fragments that painted Mom as the true architect of the exclusion, confessing how Linda had orchestrated the group chat narrative to keep me at bay, not just for the mood, but to shield her own misuse of my card details for those clandestine getaways she disguised as scouting trips for wedding vendors. A twist that hit like a revelation because it shifted the blame from sibling rivalry to maternal manipulation that had exploited my trust for years under the cover of familial necessity, making me grip the spatula tighter as anger flared hot and unfiltered at the realization that my own mother had prioritized her indulgences over the security of her grandchildren's future. And with Jake and Lily now fully tuned in to the drama, their wide-eyed questions about why Aunt Emily sounded so mad cut through the tension, prompting me to shield them partially by explaining it away as grown-up misunderstandings, while inwardly grappling with the dilemma of whether to loop them in further or maintain the barrier that preserved their innocence amid this adult tangle of betrayals, because as Lily suggested with a spark of youthful mischief, that we surprise everyone by showing up anyway to set things straight, and Jake nodded along with ideas of their own playful payback, like hiding the bride's bouquet or something equally harmless yet pointed. I felt a pang of disagreement with my own instincts that tempted me to encourage their involvement as a way to reclaim some collective power, recognizing how such choices might teach them resilience against unfairness, but also risk imprinting patterns of retaliation that could haunt their own relationships down the line. Yet the pull of impending revenge proved too strong to ignore entirely, so I steered us toward a subtler path by logging into my credit card account later that night after tucking them in with stories that avoided the day's shadows, utilizing the perks program tied to the venue's partnership to submit anonymous enhancement requests that would inject controlled chaos into the setup, such as additional interactive seating arrangements designed to encourage unwanted mingling during the cocktail hour, which Emily despised for its unpredictability, or bespoke floral installations in clashing autumnal hues that subverted her vision of a pristine pastel palette, all routed through the system to appear as thoughtful upgrades from a distant relative without any traceable link back to me. And executing that digital sleight of hand brought a wry humor to the fore as I imagined Emily's face contorting in frustration amid the very disruptions she had feared from my presence, a satisfying witty escalation that even the score without physical confrontation, though it stirred that internal conflict about crossing lines into meddlesome territory that could boomerang onto my kids if the family imploded spectacularly. But the pre-wedding chaos intensified as the formal invites arrived in the mail that week, with my name etched in fine print for the reception, only like an afterthought tacked on to appease without fully including a half measure that underscored the pitying undertone of their so-called peace, while subtle clues continued to surface. like Mom's casual voicemail referencing an old safety deposit box at the local branch containing family papers from Dad's era that she advised me to leave untouched for now. Hints that built a mounting anticipation of revelations tied to inheritance or hidden liabilities that might explain the orchestrated distance. And as the rehearsal evening finally arrived, I made the impulsive choice to attend uninvited, driven by a mix of curiosity and unresolved fury, slipping through the country club's grand entrance under the guise of a late vendor check, with my heart thumping against the elegant murmur of arriving guests in their rehearsal finery. Positioning myself discreetly at the back of the hall where candlelight flickered over linen-draped tables set for a mock ceremony that exuded the false serenity Emily craved. And just as the officiant began outlining the processional, with Emily beaming nervously at Mark's side, the venue manager entered purposefully from a side door, clutching a substantial envelope sealed with the club's embossed crest, his expression grave as he scanned the room and called out for Linda Thompson to step forward immediately, announcing in a voice that cut through the chatter like a prelude to thunder that the documents inside pertained to critical discrepancies in the booking authorization, which demanded her attention before any further proceedings could continue. His words suspending the evening in a tableau of frozen anticipation as heads turned and whispers erupted, leaving me concealed in the periphery with a pulse racing at the precipice of whatever explosive truth this intervention was about to unleash upon the fragile illusion of their perfect union. The rehearsal hall seemed to hold its collective breath in that suspended moment as the venue manager's voice echoed off the polished wood paneling with the envelope still clutched firmly in his hand. His call for Mom to come forward, slicing through the assembled guests like a prelude to an unscripted drama that no one had bargained for in this meticulously orchestrated prelude to Emily's big day. And as Linda edged her way from the cluster of relatives near the mock altar, her face a mask of faint composure that cracked slightly under the scrutiny of Mark's family, who exchanged loaded glances already primed by the earlier financial leaks. I remained tucked in the shadows at the far end of the room, my pulse thundering in my ears amid the faint scent of fresh lilies arranged in towering displays that now felt like ironic sentinels to the unfolding deception. Watching as the manager opened the packet with deliberate slowness, revealing a stack of itemized statements and authorization logs that traced a web of unauthorized charges back to my credit card, not limited to the wedding deposit, but extending into a labyrinth of personal extravagances Mom had routed through the venue's booking system over the preceding months. From luxury spa packages billed as vendor consultations to extended stays at nearby resorts disguised as site visits for the ceremony setup. Exposures that painted her as the quiet puppeteer who had exploited my account details during those unassuming family visits when she borrowed my laptop under the guise of checking emails. A revelation that rippled outward as Emily's eyes widened in dawning horror, realizing her own fiscal fibs were mere symptoms of a deeper maternal scheme designed to fund indulgences without dipping into her own dwindling retirement pool. And Mark's conservative in-laws leaned in with murmurs that hinted at reconsidering their generous contributions now that the facade of Thompson family stability lay in tatters before them. But rather than erupting into the chaos they deserved, I chose to emerge from my hiding spot with measured steps that drew all eyes toward me, my voice cutting through the stunned silence with a calm recitation of facts pulled from my own printed statements tucked in my purse like ammunition for this very contingency, detailing how these manipulations had siphoned resources meant for Jake and Lily's futures into Mom's solo escapes that she justified as coping mechanisms for widowhood's loneliness, turning the spotlight not on vengeance, but on the quiet betrayal that had eroded trust over years of one-sided generosity. And in that pivotal shift the room's atmosphere thickened with the weight of collective discomfort as Emily stammered half-formed apologies laced with accusations that I had goaded this exposure through my earlier meddlings. Though the humor crept in wryly when one of the aunts let out a nervous chuckle about how the peaceful dinner they craved had devolved into anything but underscoring the irony of their exclusions breeding the very drama they sought to avoid. Yet as the manager nodded along, facilitating an immediate refund process right there on his tablet that reversed the entangled charges with a series of confirming beeps that echoed like final judgments, I felt the profound satisfaction of that ultimate witty revenge manifesting not in shouts or sabotage, but in the simple reclamation of what was mine, watching Mom's shoulders slump under the realization that her web had ensnared her own daughters in its fallout while Emily grappled with the dilemma of salvaging her vows amid this public unraveling. And the evening dissolved into hurried dispersals with guests slipping away under excuses of early mornings, while Mark pulled Emily aside for a tense huddle that left her foundation makeup smudged from unshed tears. But the true twist lingered in the quiet drive home afterward, where the starry Ohio sky stretched vast and indifferent above the winding roads that carried me back to the normalcy of my suburban life, my phone lighting up intermittently with a barrage of texts from the imploded group chat now fractured into private pleas. Emily begging for a truce to keep the wedding afloat without further leaks, and Mom promising full transparency over a sit-down coffee where she would finally unpack the safety deposit box's contents, including Dad's overlooked trust provisions that named me as primary beneficiary to assets they had all presumed depleted, hints that suggested the exclusions stemmed partly from fears I might assert claims disrupting their assumed shares. Yet as I pulled into the driveway with the house lights glowing warmly from within where Jake and Lily awaited with their innocent curiosities about the night's absence, a deeper conflict gnawed at me because while the revenges had delivered that clever humbling they sought, involving the unraveling in ways that dragged my kids' world closer to the periphery of adult pettiness made me question if my choices empowered or simply perpetuated the cycle of resentment that had defined our family for so long. Inviting that uneasy disagreement with my own path where cutting ties felt tempting yet incomplete without exploring the ambiguities of forgiveness that might redeem the bonds or expose them as irreparably frayed. And in the end, as I stepped inside to the embrace of my children's questions about whether everything was okay now, I pocketed the phone without immediate replies, allowing the unresolved threads to dangle like loose ends in a story without tidy closure, pondering silently if true family worth lay in the debts paid or the ones left lingering to test the resilience of what remained, leaving the door cracked open to whatever revelations or ruptures the morning might bring while the night settled into a thoughtful quiet that echoed the uncertainties we all carried forward into the unknown.